Well, Donald Trump weighed in on Nikki Haley's Super Tuesday performance, saying Nikki Haley got trounced last night in record-setting fashion, despite the fact that Democrats, for reasons unknown, are allowed to vote in Vermont and various other Republican primaries. Much of her money came from radical left Democrats, as did many of her voters. Almost 50%, according to the polls. At this point, I hope she stays in the race and fights it out until the end. I'd like to thank my family, friends, and the great Republican Party for helping me to produce by far the most successful Super Tuesday in history, and would further like to invite all of the Haley supporters to join the greatest movement in the history of our nation. Biden is the enemy. He's destroying our country. Make America great again. Now, with Nikki Haley out, the 2024 general election is all but certain to be a rematch between President Biden and Donald Trump. Let's hear a bit more from the Donald himself.
This was an amazing night, an amazing day. It's been an incredible period of time in our country's history. It's been sad in so many ways, but I think it's going to be inspiring because we're going to do something that, frankly, nobody's been able to do for a long time.
Now, the Democratic primaries saw very few surprises, with Biden winning all contests. He now has 1,497 delegates. But in some ways, the big story last night on the left was the success of the left's anti-Biden protest vote, known as Uncommitted. Now, in Minnesota, Massachusetts, Colorado, North Carolina, Uncommitted or No Preference beat both Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson. In Minnesota, Representative Phillips's home state, Uncommitted garnered 19% of the vote to Phillips's 8%. In Colorado, No Preference got 8% of the vote. And in North Carolina, where both Phillips and Marianne were blocked from the ballot, Uncommitted got 13% of the vote. Now, as a reminder, the Uncommitted movement is intended to send Biden a message about the siege on Gaza and the humanitarian crisis there. And it made waves last week when they exceeded their goal in Michigan by a factor of 10, garnering about 100,000 votes there. So now this is the big question for the Democratic Party. Is there going to be some kind of scramble to try to get those voters back in the fold, especially because, unlike some other kind of left movements, these are people who were in Biden's base. These are not people that they can say aren't going to come out. These are primary voters where it's notoriously difficult to get people to come out and vote.
Yeah, I know. It's very interesting results. What did you make of Trump digging Haley there, saying he wishes she was in the race, that all her supporters are only Democrats, that kind of thing?
I think it's typical of what you're going to expect from Donald Trump. But they're both sides now are scrambling to see if they can actually reconstitute a coalition.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about what's going on with the Democratic Party, as we have two candidates here with historic unfavorables. But Donald Trump has a lot more energy, people who are actively excited about him than Joe Biden does. And whereas coming out of the Michigan primary, a lot of Democratic kind of establishment figures were saying, well, this is just Michigan. Michigan's a big state for us, and the margins are slim, so we're not totally unconcerned, but it's Michigan. Who knows if this is going to be a widespread problem, and who knows if these people are still going to be upset come election season. Now we're talking about states like North Carolina, states like Minnesota, places that you cannot argue it's just people who are voting on the basis of their identity. This seems to be a much bigger issue, a much more widespread concern.
And I would also say, to compare the issues on the Republican side and issues on the Democratic side, it feels more to me like what's gone wrong with Biden's reelection campaign are more, I guess, problems of their own making by not letting him do enough media appearances to prove if he is mentally competent, put those concerns to rest, or allow real challengers. And then he's taking these policy positions that have driven away young voters, some minority voters, costing him in Michigan, giving rise to this, uncommitted surge. It seemed to be truly sapping the momentum for reasons because of the policy positions he's taken, and because of his strategy of just remaining hidden and allowing this idea to take hold in the broader public, even among Democrats, that he's not fit to serve another term, regardless of what you think about Trump.
Right. And I do think that that's a big part of it. He might be able to better withstand some of the criticism he's getting on Gaza if he were a more nimble and dexterous candidate, but he just isn't that right now. He is unable to make the case for why it's necessary to continue funding Israel as they're being accused of historic humanitarian offenses. And also, we've seen some effort to do this pivot, right? We saw right in front of Michigan starting to use the ceasefire language. That has continued. Kamala Harris now coming out saying she's for a temporary ceasefire, but it's not really landing. The base of people that has been able to organize this massive uncommitted effort, they've been really specific and thorough in explaining to that group of people, to the base, why it is that a permanent ceasefire is necessary. So I think whereas in the past there would have been more of an ability to co-opt the message and convince the voter base at large that Biden is moving to the left on this issue and he is doing a good thing, these are highly informed, highly messaged to primary voters who have a deep investment in this issue, many of them in places like Michigan because of personal commitments, but also who have done a very good job doing grass door work, door knocking, to turn out people in a primary, which is notoriously difficult, and to motivate them with a really core, what feels like a moral, substantive issue to a lot of folks.
It's just terrible optics for Democrats that they're all now starting to, many Democrats are starting to become confronted by protesters every time they go outside. That happened to AOC, it's happened to another, Nancy Pelosi, et cetera. Being confronted on this by activists, by the people you actually want out there campaigning on their behalf.
Exactly. So we're going to get to this. I think we're going to do a little bit more and talk about the California Senate race. But Adam Schiff, who won that race, could not get through his acceptance speech, or came in first in that race. There's a top-tier two-party, top two runoff in California, but who came in first could not get through his acceptance speech because of the pro-Palestine protesters.
Yeah. Well, in other news, Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema has decided not to run for re-election. She announced in a message for Arizonans that she shared online yesterday.
I believe in my approach, but it's not what America wants right now. I love Arizona, and I am so proud of what we've delivered. Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year. Over my career, I've shown how government can work for everyday people. It's been an honor to serve Arizona for the past 20 years.
And she is one of several figures who have announced they're not seeking re-election. Mitt Romney as well, a couple of Debbie Stabenow, a couple other people.
So this is interesting news in part because she has been a thorn in the side of the Democratic Party for some time, foiling the very thin coalition, the very thin majority that Democrats have had during the Biden administration. Her and Joe Manchin have become a kind of tag team of frustration for the Democrats. There was already a primary challenge to her from the left in terms from Ruben Gallego, a Democrat. And there was some concern as to whether or not there being two Democrats or a Democrat and an independent in the race would hamstring his efforts to beat Kari Lake.
Yeah, it was going to be a very interesting three-person race with her as this kind of centrist independent, Gallego as the Democrat, and Kari Lake as this very, very Trumpy Republican in a state where the Trumpy Republicans came up very short, including Kari Lake in her own bid for governor, came up short. Blake Masters came up short. The Attorney General candidate came up short. So it was going to be a fascinating race.
This is good news for Democrats.
This is very good news for Democrats. Yeah, the smart money would bet on Gallego beating Kari Lake somewhat easily, given that she lost last time. Arizona's a very moderate right state that did go for Biden last time. Again, if you had a more moderate Republican candidate, the previous governor's a Republican. He won his election by like 1 billion points, but they have Kari Lake, so this is good news. And I was actually really looking forward to that race because it was going to be honest, any of them could have won given that dynamic, but now it's going to be more solidly in the D category, but we will continue following that.
And staying on that side of the country, we've got some interesting news coming out of the California Senate race. It yielded some few surprises with the Pelosi pick and longtime frontrunner Adam Schiff winning with 29.6% of the vote. Notably, Republican Steve Garvey, who apparently is a well-known professional baseball player. He played for the Los Angeles Dodgers and the San Diego Padres, 2 California teams. That's a good resume for a California candidate. Came in second with 29.6% of the vote. Now, his relative success is understood to be the result of Schiff's strategy to elevate the Republican over his Democratic competitors, Katie Porter and Barbara Lee. The thinking being that a conservative would be easier to beat in the Democratic-leading state in a top 2 runoff election. Big money also played a big role last night as Schiff spent more on TV ads in January than Biden and Trump did combined for their national campaigns. According to Politico, he spent more than $22 million on advertising and was benefited by a crypto super PAC that spent $10 million on attack ads against Katie Porter. Katie Porter finished with 15.8% of the vote in third place, with Barbara Lee at 6.5% of the vote.
Yeah, so Schiff carries the day. So the system there is a runner-up, or the
top two, regardless of their party, go on.
So it's a little
So
difficult
there were
to parse those results exactly.
Some Democrats were critical of the strategy. Ro Khanna, who backed Barbara Lee, who really didn't seem to be much of a factor in this race, was critical of this strategy, not just, I think, because they would prefer Katie Porter or Barbara Lee have a better shot at the apple, but there was an argument that turning out Republican voters in a primary like this by giving them a popular Republican figure to come out and vote for is going to have a negative down ballot effect, which is actually the opposite of what's been happening in some of these uncommitted races, where upping Democratic primary turnout is a good thing for the Democratic Party and puts the uncommitted people in an interesting kind of political space where normally left challengers are really vilified as hurting the Democratic Party in some way. But in this primary context, and given that they're frankly boosting turnout, people coming out to vote uncommitted to send a message to Biden who otherwise might have stayed at home, they're doing the opposite of what Schiff has set up in this California dynamic.
Absolutely. All right, we'll be back with more Rising right after this.